She slept with her ex the night before our wedding. She thought I would never find out. I smiled. I said I do. And 12 hours later, I ended her life as she knew it. Welcome to my Hudson Calm stories. Please subscribe and watch until the end. This one earns its ending. My name is Daniel Cole. For a long time, I believed I understood exactly what love was supposed to feel like. Steady, patient, unshakable. I had built my entire adult life around that belief. What I didn't understand, not until the night before my wedding, was how much of that belief had been built on a woman who was never quite as steady as she looked. Her name was Alexis. We met 4 years earlier at a mutual friend's rooftop party in Chicago. I remember the exact moment I knew I wanted to marry her. She was laughing at something completely unremarkable, head tilted back, utterly unguarded, and something in me just settled. I'm not a man who falls fast. I'm careful, deliberate, the kind of person who reads contracts twice before signing them. But with Alexis, I stopped reading the fine print. That should have been my first warning. 3 years into our relationship, I proposed on a beach in North Carolina, the same beach where her parents had gotten married 30 years earlier. She cried. Real tears, I believed at the time. And she said yes before I'd even finished the sentence. We spent the next 14 months planning a wedding that, by anyone's estimate, was going to be beautiful. 240 guests. A venue overlooking the lake. My mother's wedding dress, altered to fit Alexis's frame, hanging in a garment bag in our closet for the better part of a year. I want to be clear about something before I go further into this story. I was not a suspicious man. I never checked her phone. I never questioned her late nights at the office, her weekend trips with the girls, the way she sometimes went quiet for a day or two and blamed it on stress. I trusted her completely, the way you trust the ground under your feet, without ever once thinking to test it. The night before the wedding, tradition dictated we sleep apart. I stayed at my brother's place in the city. Alexis stayed at the venue's guest cottage with her two bridesmaids, Priya and Jenna. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Face masks, cheap champagne, an early bedtime before the biggest day of her life. I found out much later that it wasn't quiet at all. Around 11 that night, my phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. You don't know me, but I think you should know what's happening at that cottage right now. I'm sorry. I couldn't just stay silent. I almost deleted it. I nearly convinced myself it was some kind of prank, the sort of cruel joke people play on grooms the night before a wedding. But something in the specificity of it, the mention of that cottage, a detail no random prankster should have known, kept my thumb hovering over the screen instead of the trash icon. I called the number. A woman answered, her voice hesitant, apologetic even as she spoke. Priya's cousin, she said. I was at the cottage earlier tonight dropping something off for Priya. Alexis's ex-boyfriend, Marcus, showed up around 10. Alexis let him in. I left before anything happened because it felt wrong to be there. But Priya texted me an hour ago. She said Marcus is still there. She said Alexis told her not to say anything to you. I sat in my brother's guest room for a long moment, the phone still warm in my hand, feeling something in my chest go strangely, dangerously calm. Not the frantic panic you might expect. Something colder, something more focused. I didn't call Alexis. I didn't storm over to the cottage and demand answers, the way a man in a movie might. Instead, I did what I've always done when something important is on the line. I gathered information first. I decided what to do with it later. I called my brother, Ethan, into the room and told him everything. His face went through several stages of disbelief, before settling into something protective and quietly furious. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to know for certain, I said. Before I do anything, I want to know exactly what happened tonight, not just what a stranger's cousin told me over the phone. Ethan drove me to a diner 2 blocks from the venue. We sat in a booth until nearly 1 in the morning, waiting. At 12:47 a.m., Priya walked in alone. She'd texted me back after I reached out directly, asking only that we talk somewhere Alexis wouldn't see her car. Priya sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she never drank from. She told me everything. How Marcus had shown up unannounced. How Alexis had let him in just to talk. How that conversation had turned into something else entirely behind a closed bedroom door, while Priya and Jenna sat in the living room, unsure what to do. afraid of ruining the wedding, afraid of being the ones to break the news. "I'm so sorry, Daniel," Priya said, her voice breaking. "I should have called you the second it started. I didn't know how." "You called eventually," I said. "That's more than she did." I want to be honest about what I felt in that diner booth because I think it's the part of this story people find hardest to believe. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. What I felt more than anything was a strange, quiet clarity. The same feeling I imagine a surgeon must feel right before an operation. Something had to be done carefully, and there wasn't room in that process for panic. I thanked Priya. I told her none of this was her fault, and I asked her to do exactly one thing for me: say nothing to Alexis. Let the morning proceed exactly as planned. I had a plan of my own, and I needed 12 more hours to put it into place. I want you to understand something about my family. My father spent 30 years as a corporate attorney, and I'd spent the last 8 working alongside him in estate and asset law. I understood better than most grooms standing at an altar exactly what marriage meant on paper, not in the romantic sense. In the legal one: assets, liabilities, timing. That night after leaving the diner, I didn't sleep. Instead, I called my father. "Dad," I said, "I need you to do something for me before noon tomorrow. And I need you to not ask why until afterward." My father, to his enormous credit, didn't ask a single question. By 8 the next morning, he had drafted an ironclad prenuptial addendum, something we discussed idly months earlier but never finalized, mostly at my mother's gentle insistence that these things protect everyone, not just one side. Alexis had signed an early draft of it 8 months prior, waived her right to independent counsel review in the interest of moving the wedding planning along, and never thought about it again. What she didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that my father had quietly built in a clause specifically addressing infidelity discovered within the first 90 days of marriage. A clause designed originally as a formality, a just-in-case nobody expected to matter. It stipulated that any documented infidelity occurring within that window would result in an immediate and uncontested annulment, with full return of any wedding gifts, financial contributions, and joint assets to their original owner. No negotiation, no dispute. The marriage treated legally as though it had never happened at all. I had never imagined I would use it, but I had also never imagined I'd need to. The wedding proceeded exactly as planned. Alexis walked down the aisle in my mother's dress, radiant, utterly convincing in her happiness. I stood at the altar and watched her walk toward me, and I felt something that surprised even me. Not hatred, not yet. A strange, sad kind of grief, for the version of her I'd believed in for 4 years. A version I now understood had never fully existed. We said our vows. I said "I do" without hesitation, my voice steady, because I needed this marriage to be legally, unquestionably real before what came next could work exactly the way I intended it to. Throughout the reception, I smiled. I danced with Alexis to the song we'd chosen together 8 months earlier. I hugged relatives, thanked guests, gave a toast about gratitude and partnership that, in retrospect, must have sounded almost cruel in its sincerity, given what I already knew. Alexis, for her part, seemed lighter as the night went on. Relieved, I now understand that whatever guilt she carried from the night before hadn't surfaced, that her secret had apparently survived the one night it mattered most. At 11 that evening, as the reception wound down and guests began filtering toward the exits, I asked Alexis to step outside with me, onto the small stone balcony overlooking the lake where we'd taken our engagement photos over a year earlier. "Everything okay?" she asked, her hand finding mine, still glowing from the day. "No, about Marcus," I said. I watched her face in real time. The confusion, then the dawning horror. Then the desperate scramble for an explanation that could possibly make this smaller than it was. "Daniel, I can explain." "You don't need to," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Priya already did. Last night, actually, before I called my father and had him draft an amendment to our prenuptial agreement. The one you signed 8 months ago without having a lawyer review it." Her face went pale in the dim balcony light. "What amendment?" "The one that says any infidelity discovered within 90 days of the marriage voids it entirely, Immediately. No negotiation. I paused, letting that settle before continuing. You slept with Marcus 12 hours before you married me, Alexis. I have a witness. I have a timestamp. And I have a legal document you signed giving up your right to fight this. You knew, she said, her voice cracking, somewhere between disbelief and dawning panic. You knew this whole time. And you still married me. I married you, I said, because I needed this to be a legal marriage for the clause to apply. If I'd confronted you last night, called off the wedding, none of what happens next would be possible. You'd have walked away with half of everything we've built over the last 3 years, because that's what happens when an engagement ends, Alexis. Nothing gets divided, but a marriage annulled within 90 days on the grounds of documented infidelity. That works very differently. I won't pretend the days that followed were simple, or that I felt nothing but grim satisfaction. There were nights I lay awake grieving the 4 years I had spent building a life with someone who'd apparently been capable of this the entire time. Grief and vindication, I learned, can occupy the exact same space in a person's chest, but the legal process moved forward exactly as my father had designed it. Alexis, facing the very real threat of a public annulment filing that would have exposed the entire situation, including sworn testimony from Priya, time-stamped hotel security footage from the cottage's shared entrance, and Marcus's own panicked confirmation once he realized what was at stake, agreed to a private, negotiated dissolution instead. She kept none of the joint savings we built over 3 years of engagement. Savings that had been funded almost entirely by my income during a period she'd been between jobs. She returned every gift my family had given her, including a ring that had belonged to my grandmother. The condo we'd planned to move into together, purchased jointly 6 months before the wedding, reverted entirely to my name under the terms of the amendment, since her financial contribution had come directly from funds I'd transferred to her account. Funds now legally classified, under the clause's language, as part of the void marriage's undone transactions. Marcus, for what it's worth, disappeared from her life within a month, unwilling to deal with the fallout of a relationship built on exactly the kind of dishonesty that had ended his own marriage 2 years earlier. A fact I later learned Alexis had known the entire time and never once mentioned to me. The last time I saw Alexis was in a conference room with our respective attorneys, signing the final dissolution paperwork. She looked at me across the table, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly. "Don't," I said, "but I appreciate you not fighting this. It would have been worse for both of us." She nodded, signed the last page, and that was, essentially, the end of it. It's been 2 years since that wedding day. I've had a long time to sit with what happened. Not just the betrayal itself, but the version of myself who was capable of executing a plan that precise, that patient in the span of 12 hours. I don't regret it. I want to be honest about that because I think there's a temptation in stories like this to add a layer of hollow remorse. A suggestion that revenge, even righteous, legally sound revenge, leaves you emptier than you expected. That wasn't my experience. What I felt once the dust settled wasn't emptiness. It was clarity, a sense that I had protected something worth protecting. Not just my finances, though those mattered. My own dignity. My own refusal to simply absorb a betrayal and call it forgiveness. What I learned, more than anything, is that love without honesty isn't really love at all. It's a performance. Convincing enough to fool even the person giving it, right up until the moment reality forces its way through. Alexis wasn't a monster. I don't believe that, even now. She was a person who made a catastrophic choice at the worst possible moment, and then compounded it by choosing silence over honesty. When she still had the chance to tell me the truth herself, I've since remarried. A woman named Claire, a pediatric nurse I met through mutual friends about a year after the annulment was finalized. Our relationship moved slower than my relationship with Alexis ever did. Deliberately so. I told her the whole story on our 4th date, not as a warning, because I wanted her to understand exactly what she was choosing to build something with. A man who had learned the hard way that trust has to be earned continuously, not assumed permanently. I would never have needed a clause like that. Claire told me, holding my hand across the table. "But I'm glad you had one. And I'm glad you're the kind of person who thinks that carefully, even when it hurts." We got married last spring in a small ceremony with 40 guests instead of 240. My father, once again, handled the paperwork. Though this time there was no infidelity clause required. Just the ordinary language of two people building something honest together. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that 12-hour window. The wedding. The reception. The calm I somehow found while dancing with a woman I already knew had betrayed me hours earlier. People ask me sometimes how I managed to stay so composed through all of it, and the truth is simpler than they expect. I wasn't calm because I didn't care. I was calm because I already knew, by the time I walked down that aisle, exactly what I was going to do about it. And sometimes, the most powerful response to betrayal isn't rage, it's patience. The kind that waits exactly as long as it needs to and then acts with absolute precision. If you're going through something similar right now, a betrayal you're still trying to make sense of, I hope this story reminds you of something important. You don't owe anyone a dramatic scene in the moment. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet, gather what you need, and let the truth do the work for you. On your own timeline, not theirs. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one. The end.